Hi guys, Matt Easton here, historical fencing instructor and researcher. So I've been posting videos for a couple of years now, a bit longer than that, and a comment that often comes up underneath my videos is, oh yeah, but swords require more training to use than axes or maces or clubs or things like this. Is that true? Well, I'll give you the answer at the beginning. No, it's not true. Why is that? Well, let's look at the sword for a minute. Let's break it down into 5 fundamental aspects of usage. So first off, because I think it's the most important thing to learn to do at the beginning, is defending. Moving your sword into the right place, either by hitting a blow aside as it comes in, or actually putting your sword in the way as it comes in and defending yourself, so either essentially blocking or swiping, rebatting, beating things out of the way. So number 1 is defense. Number 2 is hitting the opponent, okay? In other words, cuts with the sword, but of course it would be a blow with a hammer. Okay, so cuts of various sorts, upwards, downwards, horizontal, back edge, front edge, even occasionally with the flat in some situations. Okay, so hitting. So we've got defending, hitting. Next up, thrusting. Okay, using the point. This can come from various different angles, from above, from below. So defending, hitting, thrusting. Next up is using the hilt end or the butt end, hitting with the pommel. This is usually done in close, in a clinch, in a grapple situation, or moving in close, so using the back end of the weapon. Next up, lastly, the 5th one is using it as a lever. This is normally known as half swording with a sword, but it can be done with other weapons. Just to demonstrate that, here we have a Rondelle Dagger. Let's look at what the dagger can fundamentally do. Well, yes, it can defend in different ways, okay, either point up or point down. It can hit. It's not very good at hitting, but it can hit. It can obviously stab, again, point up or point down, okay? It can hit with the pommel in a clinch, it can hit with the butt end, and of course, it can be used as a lever. This is something that a lot of people don't know, but if you look at the medieval treatises, you will see it in there. Used to defend as a lever, and used actually a leverage in a kind of hooking motion as well, or a disarming motion. So, all of those things can be done with any weapon. If we just pick up a stick, okay? So this is, if you like, this is the neutral kind of simulator for learning sword, axe, mace, warhammer, whatever. Yes, there are differences between a sword and a mace and an axe and a warhammer and a flail and things like this. However, this fundamentally can teach you the basics of all of the techniques you can do with any of those weapons. You'll notice it's a similar length to the sword. It's a similar length to different kinds of sword. Of course, this version has a hilt, which changes some of the considerations. It's a little bit longer, but you can learn the basic things of a machete. And it's a similar length to axes and maces and warhammers and such like. You'll notice that, generally speaking, percussive weapons like axes, maces, warhammers, like the one up there, tend to be a bit shorter than the sword above it. This is simply because the weight of those weapons tends to be focused at the far end of the weapon, and therefore it makes them more cumbersome to handle one-handed if all the weight's at the end and they're still very long. So generally speaking, you lessen the length of them as you increase the weight at the end of the weapon. So, let's look at this as a stick. So, first of all, as I mentioned, you can defend with it in various ways. You could defend with this stick pretty much as well as you could defend with a sword or a warhammer or an axe. Okay? It is fundamentally a bar that you're either striking something out of the way that's incoming, or you're actually blocking, more statically blocking the thing that's coming in. This acts in a very similar way to the sword or the warhammer. In striking, well, of course I can strike with the stick. It won't do as much damage as the sword or the axe, but I can strike with it in the same way. In terms of thrusting, yes, of course I can hit with the far end, and of course hitting with the butt end I can hit with the pommel end as well, and indeed using as a lever. And again, I'll reiterate that using it as a lever can be done in defensive situations, or when you're in the clinch very close up and you're actually grappling with someone and you're maybe getting the end around their neck, for example, to throw them on the ground and this kind of thing, or into the crook of the arm to put them in an arm lock. So there's lots of things you can do using this as a lever. So let's look for a second at the axe versus the sword. Why should an axe, for example, require less training than a sword? It does exactly the same things. Okay, it can defend in various ways, it can cut, it can thrust with that end, it can hit with the back end, and it can be used as a lever, just like the stick can. All the same things as the sword. The only difference really between the sword, or different kinds of sword, and an axe or a warhammer is how they move, and that does dictate how you do those 5 actions that I've just described. So the way that you swing the weapon is a little bit different. With a sword, most of the mass is near your hand. With an axe, most of the mass is at the end of the weapon. In thrusting, because the mass is near your hand, you have more nimble control of the point. With an axe, I can move the point around, I can still thrust with it, I can still jab with it, but it's not as nimble as the sword. In defending, the sword is really set up for defending very, very well, because again, the weight is back towards your hand. But the cost that you paid for having that weight near your hand with the sword is it doesn't strike with as much power. This is why with blunt swords, we can hit each other basically full power, and because the swords aren't sharp, we don't wound each other. If you use a blunt axe and hit someone full power, with the gear that we use for sparring with swords, you're going to get lots and lots of broken arms and broken necks and all sorts of bad things. Okay? The axe hits with a lot more power at target, but at the cost of nimbleness in defending and nimbleness in the thrust. So it's almost like they've turned the weapons upside down in terms of their physical properties. And so the way that you move the weapon does change, and the things that you prefer to do with it, you know, vis-a-vis striking versus thrusting, and the way that you defend, you know, the way that you form your defences and your beats and your parries does change. However, fundamentally, these weapons require the same amount of training. It's just that your training differs very slightly for each of them. Or, you know, for the warhammer, exactly the same thing for the mace. So they require the same amount of skill, and that skill is basically broken down into those, you know, very basically, as a very basic overview, into those 5 fundamentals that I mentioned. Okay, defense, hitting, thrusting, leverage, and using the hilt end to strike as well. And obviously, footwork is universal. Distance, timing, and measure are universal to all fighting, whether it's knife fighting, boxing, even wrestling to an extent, and of course, to the use of all weapons. Cheers, guys!